record. So first, let's get going. I'd like to welcome everybody. This is Dr. Judy Ann Calloway with the Long School of Medicine here in San Antonio. You are joining the Club PreMed WebChat. It used to be monthly. Now we're doing them more often. So we hope that you'll get lots of great advice about making a very strong application to medical school. I'm very excited today to have Petros MInasi with us today. He comes, he's with us annually, and it's always very, very informative. He's got lots of great things to tell us about the MCAT. Petros, we have lots of great questions. I think I'm going to let you go first because many of those will be answered.
Sure.
And so I turn it over to you, okay? So
sounds
without further ado, Mr. Petros MInasi.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Calloway.
Yes.
It's always great to be here. I think obviously lots is going on right now in the world, but the focus, of course, needs to remain as far as like the long-term picture. So right, that's kind of the way I'm seeing it right now. So just so that everybody knows, I have the chat open on the side here. So if you've got a question kind of as we go through, like just feel free to type it in and I'll answer it. You know, if I know that I'm going to be talking about or addressing the question, you know, an answer to the question that you've asked, I might not answer it. It's not that I'm ignoring you. It's just, I know that I'm going to be answering it in a couple minutes. So just feel free to put that in there. At the same time, if there's stuff that we don't cover, we'll have time at the end, I'm assuming, right, to go through any types of questions that you all might have. So, you know, the purpose of today, I think, kind of is twofold, threefold. Goal number one, of course, is to get you all familiarized with the MCAT and kind of a little bit of ins and outs. So just give you a little about my background. I've been with Kaplan for over 20 years now. I've been an instructor for the MCAT. In that time, headed up when the MCAT went through a major revision about 5 years ago, so headed up the team that actually put together the course that we use today because it was a completely new test and there was a lot to learn. Obviously, we've learned even more through the years, and you know now the program is you know continually being innovated on and updated as we get to know this exam even better. Although I think at this point we've gotten to know it about as well as we're going to get to know it because it's been around for some time. But you know, so I've kind of spent a lot of time with the MCAT is what it comes down to. So hopefully if you've got questions, I've got answers. If I don't have answers, shame on me, but we'll figure them out along the way. At the same time, you know, today is designed to kind of give you that insight, but also to, you know, kind of give you a taste of what it's going to look like when the time comes for preparing for this exam, but even more importantly, kind of the steps that you can be taking today to ensure that when it does come time to take the MCAT, you're not blindsided, right? You're not sitting there going, oh, I wish I had, you know, known this, or I wish I had kind of thought more forward. In my time as an MCAT instructor, I think the biggest observation that I've made is that students have been exposed to all the science, to all the material that is on the exam, but oftentimes, myself included, you know, as students, we are focused on doing well on the exam that's coming up that the professor is going to be giving us, right? So we're, you know, focused on that, and we sometimes forget the longer term, which is, oh, this is all going to show up again one day for us, right? So this is going to be a topic that we're going to need to understand kind of in a different way. And so when we forget that, then, you know, your work becomes even more so when the time comes. So hopefully some of what we talk about today will help you kind of shift the mindset so you're being more preemptive as you know, kind of going through this process and maybe even reflecting back on work that you've already done and some kind of steps that you can be taking right now to, you know, fill in any gaps before your MCAT prep kind of begins in earnest. So that's what we're going to look at here. It would be it'd be horrible of me to not kind of give you a sense of how the MCAT fits into the bigger picture. So we do a survey every year. So let me see. There we go. We do a survey every year of admissions officers, and so this is kind of the pie chart that we've generated from the most recent survey. We do a survey every year where we ask admissions officers from all throughout the country to tell us what they see as the most important factor in the admissions process. And of course, medical schools in general will use a holistic approach to the application process and to the admissions process, of course, looking at everything, right? It's not just all about the numbers. It's not just all about the MCAT, not just about the GPA. It's, you know, your personal statement comes in, your letters of recommendation, all the other things that you have done that make you who you are. But the reality is that the MCAT exists for a reason. And the main reason that it exists is to predict how you will perform in a medical school curriculum. It's not the only thing that's going to make that prediction, but it is, you know, if you look at kind of, again, across the board, it's one of the strongest factors as far as correlation is concerned to how a student performs on the MCAT relative to how well they're going to be able to perform in the medical school curriculum. Now, that's not to say the MCAT score dictates whether or not a person's going to make a great doctor. There are plenty of people out there who have, you know, MCAT scores that are super strong that just wouldn't make good doctors. Or you think, oh, I don't necessarily want this person as my doctor per se, but it's all about how they're going to perform, about how you're going to perform, I should say, in medical school. The one request that I will make is if you're not on mute, if you can mute yourselves, that would be great, because one thing that we've learned, because we do a lot of classes in Zoom, or we do a lot of events in Zoom as well, and especially in the kind of recent days, we've shifted all of our in-person classes to Zoom rooms, but Zoom has a bad habit of picking up microphones or picking up sounds from other folks. So I just want to make sure that that you all can hear. But as I said, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat. That being said, so here's the pie chart from the most recent kind of survey, and you know, year after year, we see that the MCAT score, that's the big dark purple blue half piece of the pie, is the number one important factor when ranked by medical school admissions officers. It's not to say that the personal statement is not important or the letters of recommendation are not important, but if you think about this in the grand scheme of things, you know, with the MCAT being an exam that is predicting how you'll perform, it's a really, really kind of first indicator for admissions officers to be looking at and schools to be looking at in the process. Now, every school does it a little differently. So there are going to be some schools that are going to say, okay, we're going to look at MCAT scores, we're going to look at GPAs, but we're going to look at everything else. And obviously, the everything else can make up maybe for some things along the way that weren't as great as far as the numbers go. But just generally speaking, this is an exam. What this tells us is that this is an exam that one really does need to take very, very seriously. It is assumed that you do some type of preparation for this exam. And by preparation, I don't necessarily mean a course per se. I mean, preparation being you've taken practice tests or you've done practice questions, right? You've prepared yourself for the undertaking of this exam. It's not like other standardized exams that you may have taken earlier in your academic careers where you can maybe think to yourself, oh, I can just wake up one morning and go take this thing and it's going to be fine, right? So the way that the MCAT is kind of set up is really about this kind of understanding that you're going to do some type of prep for it, in that you're going to review content, you're going to practice with questions, you're going to do different things to get yourself ready for this exam. The one thing I will say about the MCAT that I've learned in my time teaching it, and this is the good news for you, is that it is a very preparable exam in that there is no secret as far as what content is going to be tested. So the AMC, the folks that own and write the MCAT, are very transparent about what topics are going to be tested, what's fair game as far as this exam is concerned. So one of the, and I say this with a smile on my face, but one of the most common arguments I have with my own students is they'll say, Petros, my professor, she talked about, and then they list some topic. And we haven't covered that in our MCAT course, or we haven't covered that in our MCAT class. Why isn't Kaplan covering it? And I go, well, because it's not on the exam. So it's, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to learn in your, your coursework that you aren't going to be tested on the MCAT. And so kind of one of the big mindsets that I want you to start thinking about is being able to separate what's being tested on the exam versus what's being tested by your professors, because there is going to be a difference. And what is tested on the exam is published. I mean, it's out there. It's not a secret. So as you're preparing for this, it's super easy if you don't do it with actually following that guidance to overstudy for the exam. And by overstudy, I mean you're studying stuff that you're not actually going to be tested on and rewarded for, and therefore you are effectively wasting time. I don't want anybody wasting time. I personally hate wasting time. It's just kind of a pet peeve of mine in general. I'm like, life's too short to begin with. Like, maximize the time that's out there. At the same time, though, the weird thing about the MCAT is that the way that we oftentimes describe it is that it's a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning there's a very broad range of topics, but the level at which you are going to be tested on those topics is only about an inch deep, in that it could go a mile deep even in your undergraduate classes. So sometimes you'll see things on the MCAT and you'll maybe in fact know a lot more about it, especially in upper division science courses. If you have a professor, this was true in my case, in my undergraduate experience, professors oftentimes like to talk about things that they like to talk about, or areas of the topic that interest them, or they're maybe doing research on in their labs. So sometimes you get a little bit more insight into things. My OChem professor was an NMR nut, meaning, he had written a book, an NMR book. He was all about NMR, is what it came down to. So NMR and PKAs, but the NMR side of things, like every single reaction, every single chemical that we went through, there was always some NMR tie-in. But then you get to the MCAT and there was very little NMR. There was some NMR, but there wasn't a whole lot of NMR. Obviously, it was nice to learn that stuff, but again, that was very much influenced by his personal desires or his personal interests as far as his field of research and his field of academia. That being said, as you're studying for this exam, you want to make sure that you have that kind of clear focus and clear thinking into it. What I will also say about the MCAT in terms of kind of the general perspective of this exam, in addition to being kind of this mile wide and an inch deep, it's also an exam that does not actually reward you for just knowing content. And this is, I think, one of the things that it takes a little bit of time for students studying for this exam to get used to. But I'm going to tell you right now, I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to help you out as far as kind of your timing and making sure that you maximize the time that you have dedicated to this exam. It doesn't reward you for just knowing stuff. It rewards you for being able to apply the material and apply the content. And that's the differentiating factor sometimes between how you're tested in your undergraduate course, your pre-med courses. The pre-med professors want to make sure that you've learned the material. So they will ask you questions that you can then demonstrate that you have learned the material. The way the MCAT works is they actually assume that you know the content, and you prove to them that you know the content by being able to, one, demonstrate that you know how it works, but also being able to apply it to new situations, to new scenarios that you are unfamiliar with. So the MCAT as an exam doesn't just ask you a question and expect a response. It gives you passages where you are given this passage that you have never seen before, maybe about a topic, about an area that you have never encountered or you will encounter at a higher level, but you haven't encountered it yet. But yet you have all of the scientific tools as far as the content is concerned to be able to interpret that information, to be able to apply your knowledge to reason out answer choices. So the skill that's being tested on the MCAT as an exam is not only one in which you are demonstrating your ability to apply the content that you know, it's also actually mimicking, and I shouldn't even say mimicking, it's parallel to the kind of core underlying critical thinking skill set that a physician is actually executing on a daily basis. And Dr. Kellaway will keep me honest here on this one. But if you think about it, I'm going to really break this down to the kind of simplest of terms. A physician isn't really a physician unless they have a patient, right? They can learn the material, they can know the information, but they're not a physician until the patient is there. And a patient's not a patient until the physician's there, in a way, right? We could be sick, but not be a patient necessarily. We need the physician, right? We need the healthcare provider to be there in order for the scenario to truly work. So you think about a physician who has gone to medical school, has gone through residency, has a couple years or many years of practice under their belt. They know a lot of stuff, right? They've seen lots of a big variety of cases, right? They've been exposed to all sorts of material, but every single patient is unique. So the patient maybe will present with, let's say, a rash a mild fever, maybe a little bit of a cough, the physician's able to say, okay, let me go through, and again, I'm simplifying this for the sake of simplicity, but the physician will go through a series of deductive reasoning, a series of critical thinking steps, right? They'll ask questions, they'll order tests, they'll examine the patient, right? They'll do all sorts of things. And all they're doing in that time is they're trying to connect the dots. They're saying, okay, here's the evidence that we have. Here's what we know is true. Here's what we know is not true, right? The patient is not presenting with a super high fever. The patient is not, in an anaphylactic shock or whatever it might be. But I do know that the patient is exhibiting a rash. I do know the patient has a mild fever. I do know they've maybe recently introduced a new medication into their system. Whatever it may be, they take all that information and they take the information that they're getting from the patient. They take the information that they have from their years of experience and from their knowledge, and they put the two together in this relatively complex critical thinking machine. And what they're able to do is reason out a diagnosis, right? So you're reasoning out a diagnosis, which is essentially based on everything that I know, here's what I think is happening, and here's the course of treatment that we're going to take for what we think is happening. That course of treatment may be medication, it may be a surgery, right? Who knows what it's going to be? There's a myriad of possible answer choices of what it's going to be, but the idea is that the physician is trying to find the correct answer choice, right? And then hopefully treat the patient and see the patient improve and whatever it was that was ailing them go away. The MCAT's actually asking you to do the same thing. You go into the exam with all this content knowledge. You go into the exam having studied all the material, whatever it may be. You've done practice questions, right? You've seen the process before, et cetera, et cetera. And then the exam presents you with this new information, and it's your job to take the new information. So the MCAT, the passages are effectively the patient. You effectively are the physician in the parallel. Put the two together and reason out not a diagnosis this time, but an answer choice, right? So here's what I think the correct answer is going to be. So there's this huge critical thinking component that gets added to the layer of the science knowledge. So I'll say this much: you can be the greatest critical thinker in the world, and if you have no science knowledge, you're not going to do great on the MCAT. You could be the smartest person as far as you memorize the textbook, right? You know every single fact. You know more facts than your MCAT instructor or the MCAT itself even knows. But if you don't have the critical thinking skills, you're not going to do that great on the MCAT. So it's really necessary to kind of bring the two together at the same time. And then you start adding in these additional layers. And I don't want to scare anybody, but I might scare you a little bit. So you've got all that going on. And then on top of that, you've got to take the test in a certain amount of time, right? So you've got 95 minutes to do, each of the sections except for the critical, the car section, which we'll get to here in a second. And on top of that, you have to do all of this in one sitting, right? I mean, there's a lunch break on this exam. So it's a long day. And if you think the MCAT's a long day, not to scare you, but the step 1 exam, the step 2 exam, the step 3 exam, which you're going to be taking later on, when you're in med school and after medical school, those are even longer exams. So this endurance level is going to be something, and obviously, being a medical student, being a resident, being a physician is going to require some pretty long days and some pretty good endurance skills. So you also have to layer in all those factors, and then of course you're under a stress time condition. So there's a lot going on that comes into the MCAT score. The idea here is you need to prepare yourself from kind of a multifaceted approach, right? It's not just about reading a book and learning content. It's not just about taking practice questions. It's not just about building your endurance skills. It's all these things really getting together to come together as as your final execution as you move through this. So there's obviously a lot going on. Aaron, it's a great comparison. So I just saw that. I totally agree. It's a great comparison. That's exactly what it is. I mean, the MCAT is a reasoning test that requires science content. The LSAT, not to steer too far away, but the LSAT, for those of you who have friends who might be thinking of going to law school, they take an exam called the LSAT, which has no content on it. It's entirely logical reasoning and arguments and all that good stuff, which kind of makes sense for somebody who wants to go on to become a lawyer as far as an exam for lawyer. But yeah, the MCAT, it's like all the things built into one giant, huge exam that you have the honor and pleasure of getting to take as we go through. Any questions before I kind of jump to the actual nuts and bolts of the exam and introduce even one more layer of complexity that that's going to come into this thing. All right, we have a rule at Kaplan, which is to wait 7 seconds. So I've waited my 7 seconds, and there are no questions. So we'll keep going. So here's the myth. So Aaron, this answers your question. The big myth is the MCAT is primarily a science exam. It's not, right? It's all the things that I just explained to you, and a little bit more actually. So here's the thing. What's tested on the MCAT as far as the content goes is going to be bio. So, you're expected to take a year's worth of bio with a lab usually. General chemistry, sometimes it's referred to as inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, or orgo or OChem, depending on what abbreviation you like to use, and then physics, right? Those are the kind of 4 core sciences that you're going to be responsible for. As far as pre-med course requisites, meaning the courses that the medical schools require you to have on your transcript, right now, about 2/3 of medical schools require some kind of writing intensive course or reading and composition course that's out there. So if you've AP'd out of it, or you've gotten some exemption because your school offers a test, like that's fine. But about 2/3 of med schools will require that tick mark to be on your transcript. And then right now, about 20% of med schools require calculus. There's no calculus that's on the MCAT, but 20% or so of med schools require some type of calculus or statistics to be included in your undergraduate transcript. Here's where it gets a little bit funny though. Biochemistry is heavily tested on the MCAT. Psychology and sociology are their own section. There's a behavioral sciences section that is on the MCAT as well. However, I think there's only 1 or 2 med schools that actually require one of these courses to be on your transcript as far as a prerequisite coursework. So that's not to say that you don't have to take the courses. You obviously need to learn this material somehow, but you will be tested on biochemistry, on psychology and sociology, even though they might not be prereqs for the actual transcript. And so this is where you have to be very careful to differentiate the two between what's required as far as the application and what's required as far as the MCAT. So you might not need to take biochemistry, but you have to learn the biochemistry in order to be able to take the MCAT. So might as well just take the biochemistry course, because that's the best way that you're going to learn the material, and then you have an extra science course under your belt anyway. So kind of works out in both directions. So when you look at the actual exam, and this is what I meant by the additional layer of complexity, when you look at the exam, the difference between the MCAT and the way that you have taken courses could not be further apart from each other than the MCAT is here. And here's what I mean by this. When you take general chemistry, you are being taught by a chemist. When you take organic chemistry, you're being taught by an organic chemist, right? Take physics, you're being taught by a physicist. They want you to learn the material as a chemist knows that material, or as an organic chemist, or a physicist, or a biologist, right? Whatever the subject may be. You get to the MCAT, and all of a sudden, these what used to be independent subjects are now being tested together. There's actually this kind of cross-functional testing that starts to come into play. And let me show you what I mean by this with a really simple example that I think we can we're all familiar with it. It's flowing through us right now. So you think about the circulatory system. The circulatory system is your heart, and then a series of branching arteries, which eventually go to some form of capillary bed, and then eventually to the vein structure, which eventually comes back, to your heart, and then of course the blood gets reoxygenated in the lungs, et cetera, right? So it's this one kind of connected loop as far as the system is concerned. And the heart, not to overly simplify the heart, but my cardiologist friends might not like me for saying this, but I'll say it. The heart is nothing more than a pump, right? I mean, in the simplest of terms, as far as function is concerned, the heart is a pump. Your arteries and your veins and your capillaries are nothing more than a series of tubes, right? So, I mean, you could go to Home Depot and buy some kind of pump and buy a whole bunch of little tubes and create some, circulatory system that's in your garden if you wanted to, right? To water the plants or to water the lawn, whatever it might be. That's all that the circulatory system is doing, is it's moving fluid. You think about the blood, it's just fluid, right? Blood is blood cells and plasma, of course. It's very complex, but it's really just a fluid at the end of the day. So the circulatory system, while we oftentimes will think of it as a biological system, is nothing more than a fluid dynamic system. It is fluid being moved from one place to another. It's changes in pressure as far as the pump is concerned. It's changes in pressure as far as the tubes, which are the arteries and the veins, right? The cross-sectional area increases, decreases, et cetera, et cetera. So we start to think about a biological system with physical elements to it. You get to the MCAT and they give you a passage that's about the circulatory system. And you think, all right, I know my circulatory system. I know my heart. I know my arteries. I know my veins. And then you start getting the questions, and they're all questions that relate to physics. They're asking you to solve for the velocity of the fluid going through a certain point in the circulatory system. And you sit there and you scratch your head and you go, wait a minute, I thought this was a biology question. Very, very typical for the MCAT, because the MCAT now not only requires you to know the individual sciences, it requires you to think about the sciences in an interconnected way. And so one of the big things about the MCAT, if you look at just the section titles themselves, it's the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. It's the biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. It's the psychology, social, and biological foundations of behavior. The word biology is in all of those, because obviously you are taking this exam to become a physician, which means you're going to be interacting with humans, and we as humans are biological systems, right? We are living systems, we're biological systems at the end of the day. But really in the human body, we've got everything going on. We've got chemistry going on, we have physics going on, we have organic chemistry going on, we have all the different sciences are happening in us. So really important to kind of keep that context as you go through your own preparation and as you go through your own classes of the interconnectedness of all the sciences. I think thermodynamics is a beautiful example. Thermodynamics, you'll see thermodynamics referenced in all your chemistry classes, your OChem classes, your physics classes, and you'll see it in your bio and biochem classes, right? So if you've taken these, you keep seeing thermodynamics show up over and over again. And so often students think, oh, I'm learning different things. No, you're actually learning the same thing. I mean, all thermodynamics is the same regardless of the application of that science. So as you're studying and as you're taking the classes even right now, the more you're able to start to think about how all these sciences are connected with each other, the better prepared you will be for when you start studying for the MCAT in earnest, because you'll have already kind of decoupled the individual science topics from their individual areas and started thinking about them more globally and in the more connected fashion that they ultimately are. The last of these four sections, and this is the order, by the way, that the test happens in, but the last of these four sections, which I kind of skipped over deliberately, is the standalone. In that it is the critical analysis and reasoning skills section. We call it CARS because it's just too much of a mouthful to keep saying critical analysis and reasoning skills. The CARS section actually has no content on it. It is entirely a section that tests you on how well you're able to analyze the arguments that are being made and how well you're able to reason out deductions and inferences from those arguments and from those passages that are being presented to you. To decouple it from the science even more, the passages themselves only are on the topics in the humanities and in the social sciences, so they don't actually include any science topics in these passages. However, you don't need to know any background information about them. So in fact, fun fact for you, I oftentimes tell students that if there's a CARS passage that they just happen to have a lot of background info on, maybe it's a hobby of theirs, or maybe they're a non-science major and they've read a lot of Shakespeare and the passages about Shakespeare, let's say, you're almost sometimes at a disadvantage because you may have already formed your own opinion about that topic, or you may have some further insight. The rule with the CARS section is that the only things that are true is the information that is presented to you in the passage. Any outside information and the outside knowledge that you may have about those topics, just pretend that you don't know it. Like literally just say, okay, I'm gonna forget that I even know that information, because that could actually be a hindrance to you than a help to you on those sections. So as an exam, and you can see at the bottom here, the total seat time, meaning the time you're gonna be at the testing center, is about 7.5 hours. I mean, it's a long day. So remember earlier I was saying there's the endurance level that comes into play. It's a long kind of, activity, if you will. So don't plan anything else for the day that you're taking the MCAT, and probably don't plan anything else for the day after you take the MCAT, so you can just kind of rest and relax and recover when it's all over, for sure. That being said, that is where we kind of look into this and we say, okay, we've got that information. Now let's actually take a look at the MCAT and take a look at what we've got as far as the actual MCAT skills themselves are concerned. So we talked about kind of the content. We talked about the overall information that you're going to need to start being aware of as far as the interconnectedness of the exam. But then there's another layer, and the next layer is that every question is not only going to test you on some content, it's going to test you on a very specific set of skills. So these are those skills. So data and statistical analysis, or experimental or research design, or scientific reasoning, problem solving, science knowledge. All these skills are necessary. We put the yellow one in, the MCAT expertise. The better you know how the game is played, the better you're going to play at the game. And really, the MCAT, in some weird way, is a game. The better you know the rules, and better know how to work the rules and understand how to prepare for the rules of the game and the skills that are necessary of the game, the better you're going to be in the long run. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about these passages that you're going to see for the MCAT, but there is a subset of questions, 15 of them to be precise, that are, or I should say approximately 15 of them, that are not linked to a passage. So here's where it gets a little bit weird. So you've got most of your questions on the test. You got, 59 questions in a given science section. Most of them are linked to a passage, but there is a subset that is not linked to a passage. That doesn't mean that you don't need to apply critical thinking skills. So these discrete questions, as they're referred to, or as we refer to them as, are questions that require you still to apply the critical thinking, but they don't have a passage to support the information. All the information, again, that you're going to need is going to be in the question itself. And they're, somewhat longer than your kind of typical question than you may experience in a undergraduate class. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of these. Out of curiosity, how many of you have taken physics? Maybe put like a yes or something in the chat if you've taken physics. Okay, so all right, a good number of you have. Perfect. You're taking it now. All right, so Fatima, this might be you might be like, oh, I totally remember this because I learned this the other day. Good. Okay. Here's the good news. If you haven't yet taken physics, I'll show you the formulas that you would need to know. But obviously on the MCAT, they're not going to show you those formulas. Let me show you what I mean by this kind of interconnectedness, and also another skill, which is just being kind of a good reader, is what it comes down to. So we're going to show you a couple questions here, and this should be fun. So this is about the application of the science knowledge, the critical thinking skills. So I'm going to walk you through the kind of critical thinking process that you're going to want to employ. And this actually here is really the other big myth, which is that the MCAT tests you like your science professors do. It doesn't, right? It tests you nothing like your science professors do. It tests you in a very, very different way. So here's the strategy that we employ. And we actually, we've had a variation of the strategy for some time, but we're always tweaking it, we're always revising it. So we just did this last year, we did a recent kind of tweak and revision. It didn't change the core meaning of the strategy in any way, but we tried to update it a little bit to make it even more streamlined. So when you are taking the MCAT, you're going to want to follow these 4 steps for every single question. And the way that you know that you've learned these steps is that it's reactionary. You're not sitting there going, let me think through each of the steps. You just do it, right? And it's similar to what a physician is going to do, right? Physician doesn't necessarily actively think through every single thing that they're doing because they've just done it so many times that they know that they're doing things in the right order, right? So it's not okay, let me read the directions. It's like if you bake or if you cook, the first time you make a recipe, you got the recipe out, you're crossing things off. You're just like, okay, I need to look at every single thing. The 10th time or the 100th time that you've made something, you can just do it, right? You just go. You got all your ingredients. You make whatever it is that you're making, and it comes out perfect, right? So you don't have to think about it. Same kind of thing with the MCAT. You just want to train yourself to get to that place. This doesn't happen overnight. Generally speaking, Kaplan students prep for about 300 to 350 hours total for the MCAT. That's all the class time and practice tests and reviews, like everything, all in. So it's a lot of time is what it comes down to. But I'm going to give you a preview of this so you kind of see what we mean by this. So first things first, obviously, you got to read the question. So you can't take the MCAT without reading the questions. So you read the questions, and the first thing you're going to want to do is you type the question. I don't mean type on your keyboard. I mean you type it, and then you say, okay, what's the question that's being asked of me? Right? What's the question type? Are they asking me to solve a problem? Are they asking me to find a relationship? Are they asking me to do X, Y, or Z? You get into the cars section, there are like 8 different question types that are there. And the sciences, there are a bunch of different question types. So you got to figure out what kind of question it is that they're asking you. And you need to kind of, judge the difficulty of the passage. You need to decide whether you want to do it now or you want to save it for later. The thing about the MCAT is, the way you get a higher score is by getting more questions right. No one question is worth more than any other question. So sometimes it is to your advantage to look at a question. I mean, I've had this happen to myself, to my students. You look at a question, you're like, I totally know how to solve this, but I also know that it's going to take 3 or 4 minutes to solve a question like this because I got to balance a redox reaction, or I have to solve for a KSP, and that takes time. I can go get other questions correct in that amount of time. Let me go do that. So you kind of type it out, figure out what the next steps are. Second part of the exercise, of the strategy, is to rephrase the stem. Say, how would I simplify the phrasing of the question stem to actually figure out what is being required of me? So this is really finding the question behind the question. If you can master the rephrasing step on the MCAT, you are going to be set up for a great amount of success, because that's a skill to just get to the root question. There's going to be a lot of fluff in there. There's going to be a lot of extra information. What are they really asking me to show them? Then you want to investigate the possible solutions. And what we mean by that are the potential solutions. What we mean by that is actually, this is where you bring in your prior knowledge, you bring the information that's in the passage or in the question to actually do the work to make the prediction for what you are going to choose or want to choose as your answer. And I'll give you this example, which is a real world example, which I think most of us can relate to. Let's talk about grocery shopping. Sitting there probably thinking, how does grocery shopping relate to the MCAT? It's actually the perfect metaphor for how you want to approach the MCAT. There are 2 ways you can go grocery shopping. I guess right now there's always a third way, but now there's a third way in that you can order stuff online, becoming more and more popular through the years. But let's think of traditional grocery shopping. 2 ways you can go grocery shopping. You can go to the grocery store the way that I go to the grocery store, which is I grab the cart and I literally snake my way up and down the aisles, and I grab stuff off the shelves because I'm like, oh, I need that. Oh, I had that. So that's how I go grocery shopping. Anybody do that that way, where you're just like, this is efficient. I'm going to go through the entire store. I'm going to see everything, and I'm going to grab what I need, and I'm going to go home, and I'll be fine. The problem with going grocery shopping that way is that inevitably you forget something, or you buy something that you already had and you forgot that you had at home, right? This is kind of the normal thing that happens. And grocery stores and Costco around the world loves that we do this, because we end up being the stockpile for them at home. The second way to go grocery shopping, which is the better way to go grocery shopping, is that you make a list and you go to the store and you get everything on your list. You cross off all the items, and you're not fooled by any buy 2, get 5 of these for free, et cetera, right? You just are like, this is exactly what I'm going to get. And you get home and you have precisely what you need for the week or for the month or whatever it might be. The way you want to approach the MCAT is the second way. You want to go into the answer choices looking for the answer, as opposed to letting the answer find you. In a multiple choice test, MCAT has 4 answer choices. 3 of them are going to be incorrect. 1 of them is going to be correct. The 3 that are incorrect are incorrect for a reason. They've deliberately chosen those wrong answer choices, right? They have put a common miscalculation, or they've put a common trap answer. They have put things, and this is where it gets really, really mean of them. They have put things that are factually true, but they don't answer the question. Answer choice C might say the sky is blue during the daytime. Yes, that is factually true, but the question was asking you what is the sum of 2 plus 2. So you could easily look at answer choice C and say, yes, that's a true statement. I'm going to choose that, but you'd get the question wrong because you weren't actually answering the question that was being presented to you. So it's far better to go into the answer choices looking for a match rather than letting something find you, because you're going to be trapped, right? You're going to fall for those trap answers. So that's the methodology. It's type, rephrase, investigate, match. If you hadn't already seen it, it's TRIM, right? So nice, easy way to remember it. So TRIM, easy way to remember it, and you can use it accordingly. So let me show you an actual question. So let's actually take a look at this and see what we mean by how to actually put this through. So here's the question. And sorry, my apologies. This should be there should be a little caret here for some reason. I think when it converted into PowerPoint, it didn't carry over. So my apologies for that, but we'll make it work. It says if the bond between two phosphate groups in ATP is 9 times 10 to the negative 11. Now I'm going to stop there. When I see phosphate groups and I see ATP, what topic am I thinking? Between biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics. What am I thinking when I see ATP? What should like pop into your mind? Where did you learn about ATP the first time? Was it in your physics class? Was it in your chem class? Was it in your bio class, right? So yeah, this got to be a bio question. But then all of a sudden it says, by how much would the electric potential energy change if the bond length were 3 times shorter? You say, wait a minute, what does ATP have to do with electric potential energy? Well, remember what I said earlier, they're all connected with each other. This isn't a bio question. This isn't a question about ATP. This is a question about electric potential energy, right? That's what they're asking you for. So if you were to type the question, you'd say, okay, they're asking me about electric potential energy. If I look at the answer choices, if you look at A and B, they both say decrease. If you look at C and D, they both say increase. If you look here, it says 3 times, 9 times, 3 times, 9 times. So there's a pattern that is in these answer choices. You may have to do a calculation, but seeing as there are no like precise numbers and they're not actually asking you. So if we kind of look at this from the potential of identifying what the actual question is that's being asked of us, they're not actually asking you to give them the new number. They're asking you for the relationship, right? For what's going to happen when we make the bond length 3 times shorter. They're not saying, give us the actual number as far as what the electric potential energy is going to be. So if we rephrase this question, if the bond length is 3 times shorter, what is the new electric potential energy? What happens to the electric potential energy? Does it go up? Does it go down? And by what factor? So here is where we're going to look at this and say, okay, let's actually pull the information that we know. So we do a little bit of investigation. From our knowledge, so for those of you who've taken physics, or for those of you who haven't taken physics, this would be the formula. For those of you who've taken physics, you recall this, you say, okay, electric potential energy is K times Q1, Q2 over R. And we say, well, our new distance, so our old distance was R, our new distance is 1/3 of R because it's 3 times shorter. We plug 1/3 of R in, we do a little bit of algebra, right? Not even algebra, a little manipulation, if you will, of these numbers, a little arithmetic. We multiply through by 3, essentially, to get rid of this 1/3 in the denominator. And we realize that the new electric potential energy is going to be 3 times K Q1, Q2 over R. The Q1 and the Q2, the value of the Q1 and the Q2 doesn't actually matter because they're not changing, right? We're not introducing a different group into this. We're just saying, okay, same two phosphate groups. We're not changing anything about those Q1 or the Q2. All we're changing is that R. So it is increased, right? Gone up, and it happens to have gone up by a factor of 3. That's our prediction. We choose answer choice C. Even if you didn't know that it was going up by a factor of 3, you know that it's going up, so you could eliminate answer choices A and B, right? So there's that part too. They put 9 times in there because guess what? There's going to be a handful of students that might think that this is an R squared value as far as the formula is concerned. There's going to be a handful of students that instead of putting 3 times shorter, instead of representing that as 1/3 over R, are going to put 3 R's. So they're going to flip it around. So these other answer choices that are there for a reason, right? Answer choice A is if you would put 3R into the, if you put 3R into the denominator as opposed to 1/3 R. Answer choices B and D is if you use the wrong formula. So remember what I said earlier about not falling for the traps. These are all trap answer choices except for the one that is correct. So really important to go into this, as it's going. And then yes, Aaron, if you think about it from a conceptual perspective, you have a shorter bond length, which therefore means you're going to have a higher, right? I mean, the phosphate groups, they don't want to be next to each other, but you're forcing them to be closer to each other. That means there's a higher electric potential energy in there for them to want to push themselves apart because they're like and like as far as the charges are concerned, right? They're both going to have the same charge. So yes, conceptually, you say, okay, I know that's going to increase because I'm bringing closer. So lots of ways that you're going to attack it, but here's kind of that methodical way of looking at this in terms of not getting kind of flustered by the other stuff that may be out there. Do you like that one? Do you want to do one more? Because I got one more. I got a bio one this time. So this was a physics problem, essentially, hidden in the shroud of ATP and biology. This one's a fun one, though. This is actually my favorite question that we do for a variety of reasons. Noticeably, right from the get-go, what can you see that's different about this one versus this one? Just the question alone, not the answer choices, just the question itself. What's kind of stands out at you as far as the STEM is concerned?
There's more words.
There's more words, exactly, right? There are more words. There are no values in this one, right? There were values in this last one over here, and it's longer, right? It's a longer question is what it comes down to. Here's the fun thing about this question. Question says, first sentence, says the sodium-potassium pump is an ATPase that pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for each ATP that's hydrolyzed. Have they actually asked us a question in that first sentence? No, right? They've given us information. Have you learned in your bio classes, or will you learn in your bio classes, that the sodium-potassium pump is an ATPase that pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for every ATP that's hydrolyzed? Absolutely. If you'd forgotten it, good news. They just told it to you. But bad news, they're not going to reward you for just knowing that. This is where it comes down to the fact that you have to know how to apply the content. It's about applying the information. Second sentence says, cells can use the pump to help maintain cell volume. Again, they haven't asked us a question, they've given us information. You may have learned about this in your bio classes, but maybe you haven't, and that's okay. They've just given you the information, but they still haven't actually asked us a question. The third sentence is the actual question. Which of the following would most likely happen to the rate of ATP consumption immediately after a cell is moved to a hypotonic environment? Which now leads us to, what does hypotonic mean, right? So they're asking us as far as the ATP consumption. It's a which of the following question, which means you're going to have to look at the answer choices. At some point, pick the one that works, but you can maybe make a prediction. And you say to yourself, well, I now need to know what a hypotonic environment is. So they're really asking you, how does the ATP consumption change right after the cell's put in the hypotonic environment? And you think to yourself, okay, hypo means low. Hypotonic environment, as far as you got your cell, you throw it into hypotonic environment, there's a lower concentration of solute in the hypotonic environment, which means there's a higher concentration of water on the outside of the cell compared to inside of the cell. So the water is going to flow in, the cell is going to swell, right? And if too much water flows in, the cell is going to burst. In fact, the easiest way to lyse a cell is to throw it into super distilled water, right? So like triple distilled water, you can pretty much lyse any cell because of the hypotenacity of it. So you say, okay, if you want to help maintain the cell volume, who can come help, save the day? Well, the good old sodium potassium pump. They just told us that. We're pumping out 3 sodium, pumping into potassiums. So there's a net movement of one ion outwards. In order to make that happen, the ATP consumption is going to have to increase, right? We have to be doing more work, right? More work, more work, more work. And in order to be able to do more work, and this, for some reason, oops, I deleted this over here and then it just showed up again. So don't worry about that. That's from another question. So just ignore that entirely. So don't even know where that showed up from. Bottom line is, it's going to cause you to do more work, which means more ATP consumption. But here's the trap for this one. The correct answer is that it would increase once you reach an isotonic state, right? We're nice and happy. The inside and the outside of the cell are the same. Then it would decrease. Notice that answer choice C over here, right? This answer choice right here, this is saying exactly that. But the question didn't ask you for what will eventually happen. The question asked you for what will happen immediately. So here's a fun fact. When we give this question under kind of uncoached conditions, there's actually a very large handful of students who will initially choose answer choice C. In fact, if I had kind of baited you, which I could have led you to believe that the correct answer was answer choice C by ignoring the fact that this word immediately is so important. So here's another little fun fact as far as the MCAT is concerned. It's not just about knowing the content. It's not just about being able to apply the content. It's also about being able to pick up on these subtle little tiny words sometimes, these key words. In fact, the most important word on this screen is not ATP, it's not sodium potassium pump, it's not hypotonic. The most important word on this screen is the word immediately. Because if you hadn't seen the word immediately, you could very easily have chosen answer choice C. Think to yourself, it goes up and then it goes back down once we end up with that isotonic state. So the correct answer choice on this one is answer choice A. It would increase immediately. Eventually, it would go back down. So you have to be on the lookout for things like that. So yeah, so Aaron, yeah, it got you, right? You pick, you're like, oh, it's answer choice C because eventually everybody's going to be happy. Absolutely. But they don't care about what eventually happens. They care about what immediately is happening. So this is just the nature of the exam. I think it's a good thing that they want you to be detail oriented. I prefer my physicians to be detail oriented, quite frankly, and I think we all appreciate that. So I think it's but that's just part of it. Like what I hope you've seen here today is there's a lot going on with this exam. This is not an undertaking to take lightly, right? This is something that it will take time. It's very doable though. As I said at the beginning, it's the most preparable exam because of the transparency and just by the very nature of the exam. It's a very, very preparable exam for you. So it's just a matter of taking the time to do the preparation to make sure that you're doing the right things in the right places. So with that said, I have nothing more officially to say. We'll open it up to Q&A and take it from there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Petros. You all, I think you can unmute your mic if you open up the chat. If you, not the chat, maybe the chat, no, but the participants, then you can raise your hand. I think that's the place where you can raise your hand. Yes, right? I think that's it. Or just speak up.
That works too, right?
Yes, just unmute your mic. I do have some questions that you all wrote ahead of time. Would you all like to talk about some of those? Do I see any? You also have reactions down there. If I see your video, yes, you want me to say a few words? Yeah, okay. Thank you. I see a couple of thumbs up. So interrupt me anytime, unmute your mic to ask Mr. MInasi and I other questions. A lot of people ask about time management, and I think there are two things involved. I've got some ideas for one part, but time management I think can refer to your in-test time And I think Petros gave us one good tip when he said, if this is going to take you 3 minutes, that tip, if it's going to take you 3 minutes to answer a question, but you could go ahead in those 3 minutes and get 4 more right, then that might be a better use of your time. So there's the in-test time management that I'd like you to comment on, but the overall time management, a lot of questions like, when am I supposed to take this? How do I'm a father, I work full time, I've got all these other things. So I do want to say, I think I'm reiterating something that Petros said earlier. You might be, if you haven't seen it yet, you might be underestimating this test. And that's why he's devoted to this, this mission of helping you do better. And one thing we would want you to realize is just don't underestimate the test. It really takes good, solid preparation. It needs to be taken seriously, like a key course. He showed you that pie chart. 75, I'm sorry, it is holistic. Every school will tell you they're holistic, but 75% of this is grades and MCAT, okay? I have a little something, I'm gonna let him comment now. And there's some other things y'all have said. And at the very end, before we sign off, and I've got to go maybe like at 1:20 or so for another Zoom meeting, I want to read you a few things from a woman who ended up at our school and how she sort of got her head around it the first time she did it and was disappointed in her score. But for the overall time management, you're just going to have to come up with a plan. Please look, I don't know if Petros would endorse this, but the AAMC has some free and low cost resources, but one of them is 6 steps to planning. I mean, it takes you hours just to plan how you're going to be doing this. Okay, so I would look up that. Petros, I give it to you.
Yeah. So yeah, agree with everything. Like planning. So one, don't underestimate this thing, because it's a big test. Like it's basically 2.5 years of undergraduate science courses wrapped into one day when you think about it as far as an exam goes. So absolutely making a plan. I think the easiest way this will work is, Dr. Calloway, I will send you some blog articles that we have. One of them is like a planning doc as well. Excellent. Or like planning articles. So kind of, and we've got like one that's like a 1-month plan, a 2-month plan, a 3-month, and a 6-month plan. So you gotta, figure out the right ones, and tips and tricks and all that good stuff's all built in there. Great. So I'll send those to you, and then you can distribute to the group, or post it or whatever. So yeah, planning, absolutely. AMC has some great resources. Absolutely use them. Like, you're going to spend a little bit of time, and by a little bit of time, I mean a good number of hours, just planning out your studying, let alone the studying itself. Like you're going to need to invest a little bit of time in that. It's going to be frustrating, because you're going to think to yourself, well, I could be spending this time studying. But if you study without a plan, you're going to be studying the wrong things. You're going to be, not putting the focus in the right places, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a balancing act for sure. That being said, the thing that you have to remind yourself constantly when studying for this exam is that your score only improves by getting better at the things that you're not good at. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we all struggle, whether we like to admit it or not, we all struggle with accepting that. As human beings, I see some smiles coming because you know where I'm going with this. As human beings, we like to do things that we're good at, right? We have the hobbies that we're good at. If we play sports, we play the sports that we're good at, right? We major in the things that we're good at. Right? That's how we have all, because we feel good about ourselves. And when you're studying for the MCAT, if you're really good at chemistry, let's just use that as the example, you're going to want to keep doing chemistry problems, because every time you get one right, it's like, yes, I got it right? You get that little energized feeling to yourself. You're not going to want to go do physics problems, because if you're not good at physics, because you're like, I don't do well at this, but your score's not going to improve either. So you have to force yourself to do the things that you're not great at, because that's where your score improvements lie, which means not only do you need to have like the plan in place, you need to be ready to alter your plan as you are studying, as you are taking diagnostics, as you're taking questions. Because if you're getting every single thermodynamics question correct, guess what? You're done studying thermodynamics, because you're not going to get there are only so many points on the test that are going to be about thermodynamics, right? So you have to force yourself to go to those other areas. So the one thing I'll add to the planning is make sure you have a method, or a means, I should say, of being able to identify where those weak areas are, where those opportunities are. Like the way that in our course, the way that it works is that we are constantly analyzing the performance of the students. So as someone's taking a full-length exam, it's like literally making recommendations like, you are weak in this, like we recommended you go here. It's kind of like choose your own adventure or whatever. I watched this really cool movie on Netflix recently. It was, you like chose where to go next. I was like, oh, this would be like the MCAT, right? Like kind of choose what to do next. So same kind of rules apply in that you have to force yourself to be you have to be open to, quite frankly, struggling. Because when you're studying, if it doesn't feel like a challenge, then you're not doing it right, is what it comes down to. So like I would say that's the key there. Perpetua. I saw your hand raised. I saw Aaron's hand raised earlier. Now they're not raised. So if you still have a question, just ask it, or yeah.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Someone did ask. I was just gonna ask, while I'm studying, what I guess how would I plan out my diagnostics, just so I see my progression or how I'm studying,
Yep.
or how my results are?
Yep. So great question. One, take a diagnostic before you start studying, because that gives you the baseline. And there's something about a diagnostic which is slightly false, in that if you take an MCAT or like we have a free practice test, I would say go take that one. Like it's free, go take it. It'll give you a sense of what your score would be today if you didn't do any studying. Just gives you, tells you what your strengths and weaknesses are. The problem with taking an MCAT diagnostic alone, though, is that it tells you how you would score on the exam, but it doesn't necessarily tell you whether you got a question right or wrong because you knew the content or because of the critical thinking skills element of it, right? Because maybe you know the content, but you didn't know how to apply the content, and that's why you got it wrong. Or maybe, you got it right because you were able to kind of work it out, but you didn't necessarily do it in the most efficient manner. So what we do as far as the diagnosis is concerned, similar to going to the doctor, right? They don't just listen to your lungs, they give you a blood test also, right? So it's not just good enough to say like, let me look at this. We have to also, look at a lot of different information. So what we do in our classes is we give you two diagnostics. You take an MCAT diagnostic and you take a science diagnostic, which is not MCAT style questions. It's like pure, do you know the stuff or do you not know the stuff? And then we put the two together. So do some level of that. Or you have to kind of be able to split the two at first. As far as full-length exams go, full-length exams are a phenomenal part of your preparation and should be integrated into your preparation in some way, shape, or form. Try to get into a cadence of doing one per week at minimum in the 4 to 5 weeks leading up to the exam. That way, when you go take the actual exam, it's just another day that you're taking a full-length exam. It just happens to be the real deal. Don't take too many of them, and don't let them be the only thing that you do, namely because they take 7.5 hours. So it's a long time. But also, the act of taking the full-length exam is important only if you actually review the full-length exam and see where your strengths and weaknesses are, right? It's not just taking the exam. That's if you just keep taking. I had one student a couple of years back. He was a procrastinator, like classic procrastinator who wanted to do everything but did nothing. He comes to me 2 or 3 weeks before the MCAT. He's like, I haven't taken any full-length exams, but it's okay. I'm going to take one every other day. And I was like, no, you're not. Like, why would you want to take, I see some of your reactions now. Like, why would you want to take a 7.5 hour exam, like on Monday and then one on Wednesday and be exhausted by the end of this? I was like, no, just take, 2 at this point and you'll be better off. And he ended up doing fine. Like it all worked. But point being is it's about planning it out accordingly. I know there was kind of a question, Dr. Kelly, you alluded to this as far as like fitting all this in. So let me just take a moment to talk about that, because obviously I keep saying, do this, do this, do this. It's like, where am I supposed to find all the time? You're not going to do this in a month. Ideally you're studying for the MCAT over like a 4 to 5, maybe even a 6-month period, right? So it's a balancing act. You're going to have to give up some things. Like I don't, the way I always tell students is you've got your like essential obligations as far as personal, and that's first, always personal obligations. And by obligation, I mean obligation, not I'd like to go do this. That's not an obligation. That's as soon as you say the words I'd like to, not an obligation, but I have to take my child to the doctor, or I have to go to the gym because I got to stay healthy or whatever. Those are personal obligations that you keep. Professional obligations. So if you're working, obviously, like keep going with the professional obligations. If you're in school, that is a professional obligation. I mean, no one's going to turn around and say, oh, your grades were bad. That's okay. You were studying for the MCAT. I mean, you got to do all these things. So you got your personal obligations, your professional obligations. Those are the two kind of primaries you got to fit in. The third one, oddly enough, is not studying for the MCAT. It's actually getting some downtime. So this is where it gets weird. If you don't take downtime, you will actually hurt yourself in the long run. So you find an afternoon or a day, a week, if you can afford it, as far as time goes, and just block that off as I'm clearing my head. I'm going for a hike. I'm whatever it might be. Like I'm just going to sit at home and watch TV. I mean, whatever it is, you got to give yourself some downtime. And then you got to go put in your actual MCAT studying. Earlier on, it's going to be more content review. Later on, so as you kind of start, it's more content review. The content review will decrease the further and further you get closer and closer to test day, because the practice is going to be increasing, right? So it's kind of this balancing act between the two, where at some point you'll be at an equilibrium, and then you'll kind of, one will taper off and the other one will take up most of your time. But make sure that is adjustable, because this is a changing game. You put a focus on one content area or one section type or section area and, master it, and you got to move on. You got to say, okay, now I'm going to go do the next thing. It's a constant balancing act. If we were to draw out kind of initial study plans and compare them to the actual study plan that gets executed by a student, they're never the same, because your starting plan is your starting plan, and that's good. But as you go, the more you're able to fine tune and adjust and deviate accordingly, correctly, the better off you'll be in the long run, for sure.
That creates a lot of anxiety for people who have made a plan and it's not working. They were very ambitious, optimistic about the plan, and then you start to panic and freak out, and other things are going on. So you cannot I think that's great advice. Just expect change in the plan, but do your best to realistically look at your time period. I have heard Mr. MInasi say that the people most successful, tell me, you might revise this, but spend a solid 3 months. I know I'm anxious to see the plan that you'll send us for distribution later for different periods of time. But if you have a solid period where you can every day, like religion, go to the library, get your study materials, plan your tests, look at the resources that you're going to use and make a plan, those are the people that are most successful, right?
Yep.
Not just fitting it in like in a semester. We usually, in a traditional pathway, we ask people to take it at exactly the wrong time. Spring semester is when you take physics and organic too, and then we want you to also study for the MCAT, and that's just wrong. So a lot of people I advise who might be thinking about a gap year anyway, that's a wonderful thing about it, a gap, to plan that study time in.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's as far as the fitting in the MCAT, the worst study plan is to say, I'm going to just spend 8 hours on Saturday and Sunday, and then 2 hours, and not actually have what that is. That's what when you said the unrealistic, it just triggered this, bad memory of a student from a year ago, actually. She comes to me and says that she's going to read, or her study plan for 1 week was that she was planning on reading the entire, we have 7 books in our, the subject books, the subject review books. She was going to read the entire 7 books in 1 week, because she planned on reading 4 chapters every hour. I was like, no, that's not, again, were you not listening on day one? That's not the way to do it. It's because you're not going to, you might read them. I don't even think you're going to can physically read for the 4 chapters, let alone retain it and do the way. So yeah, and yes, we're all used to having plans, but that is, Dr. Galloway, you couldn't say it more perfectly. Part of the plan is that the plan is going to change, and we don't like that. We're not comfortable with that ever. Yeah. But that is what's going to happen. So yeah.
Deli has a question, and Victoria and Fatima have their hands up. So while you read the chat question, I also want to say, before I have to go or close us out, really, COVID has affected our lives in all kinds of ways and given us all some challenges. You are undergoing challenges of your own, each and every one of you. There are questions every day about what do admissions people, what are medical schools thinking? My MCAT has gotten canceled, and the soonest I could reschedule was for June, and grades changing from regular ABC coursework to pass fail or credit no credit or satisfactory, all kinds of things. What else is there? And online, of course, everything. The world is going virtual. So I want you all to be reassured that our school and all of the others, actually across the nation, there are a lot of conversations going on about how we are adapting to this situation. You've got lots of challenges and lots of anxieties and maybe an increase, anyway, this should not increase your anxiety. Okay, so let the MCAT anxiety alone, handle that, but don't worry about the timing of turning it in. Get your application done if this is your cycle. Your MCAT is in June, July, August, whenever it has to be. We will be watching for it. So we know that the interview season may get pushed back because of this. It's always good to get your application in anyway, so that TMDSAS can do all the other processing. And then when you're ready and you have a solid study plan that's extended or your test date is postponed, use it for more practice tests and more study. So do not worry about those kinds of things. And we're accepting online, of course, and pass fails, even for the prerequisites. So all of the Texas schools are doing that. If you go to the TMDSAS website, you'll find some links to the Texas Health Education Service, and they keep a newsroom where the schools have put our individual responses, but in general, we have adopted policy now that you'll see on their website by this afternoon. Okay, so I just wanted to get in there. But Petros, do you see Jelly question?
I do. Yeah, number one thing for retaking the exam, it's gonna sound like a very simple answer to a relatively complex question, is to do something different. In the sense of if your plan the first time didn't get you to this place you wanted to get to, you need to make revise it essentially. Average improvement on the retake of the exam, it's hard to say. If you go to the AMC statistics, you can actually see the numbers, but it's hard to say because some students do a lot between their first time and second time. Some students didn't study or didn't take it seriously the first time, and they take it seriously, so they'll see a big improvement. Some don't do anything different. So we don't talk really about averages because averages are there's lots of noise in the number. There were two other questions, there were two other hands that were raised. So Fatima, you had a hand raised.
Victoria and Fatima, do you want to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Again?
Hi, I'm currently studying to retake my MCAT, and I was just wondering, is there a certain point increase that admission committees look for when retaking your MCAT?
That's a better question for Dr. Calloway than for me. So.
An improvement, we feel kind of sad and distressed for a person who's taken it the second time and made the same thing, and they haven't heard the advice of like, really look what you did and here's what you got. You really need to do something differently. It's only bad when people are doing it over and over again without achieving some sort of improvement. We every year, all season long, we interview people who have increased it by 5 and 10 and more points. And I always ask them, what did you do? And they sort of had a different take on the test. Having experienced it, then they could appreciate that their previous study just wasn't enough. You really have to devote yourself to it. I'll send you what Christine Onyi-Rioja wrote about it. I'll post it somewhere or send it to you all, because she just took a take. She writes well about it. I'll give you her message in full somehow by emailing.
Thank you. And then
so get rid of that pressure too. Do your best. Sometimes people say, well, what am I aiming for? You're aiming why would you aim for anything but then to get the test all correct? If you're having a test in a course, you don't say, well, I'm just going to study this chapter and not the other 3, and I'll get about 30% or 25%. You don't do that. You aim for the 528. And, you know, not very many people get there, but you aim high always in everything. What else? So Fatima, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to appreciate you guys for doing this. It's really heartwarming that you guys are doing this so I can get my questions out. I just had a personal question. I narrowed down to like 2 MCAT answer choices, and I always end up choosing the wrong one.
Always feels that way.
Yeah, I always double guess myself, and I guess maybe like you said today, it's like the keywords and having the answer find me. So is there anything else that I could do in these like next 2 months to kind of like push myself to the right answer?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, you just said it. If you say the answer finds you, then you're doing it. You should be looking for the answer. So, you know, sometimes people will say, oh, you know, you don't find the house finds you, and that's how you buy your first home or something. No, in this case, you are finding the answer, and you need to justify to yourself why that answer is correct. It always, I mean, I've heard that statement, myself included, a bunch of times, right? I narrowed it down to 2, and I always picked the wrong one. Chances are you're also sometimes picking the right one. You just you're more transparent to the one that you picked, the ones that you got wrong as a result of it. What I would say is go back though, because there's no magic pill, right? There's no magic wand I can wave and say, poof, this is done. Go back to the questions. I'm assuming you still have access to them, the ones that you've, you know, gotten down to your 2 or whatever, and go back and see what was it that was wrong about the wrong one. And what was right about the right one, and what is the fact or the kind of missing link that you missed in the process, and start from there as far as kind of your review and your attack for things. And I mean, that's true for even if you're not in that boat. Like, you want to always be looking at the explanations to see kind of what you know, what it is that the expert who's written the explanation is saying is the right way to go about it. So.
Okay. I think that also feeds into like doing your review right after you take your exam, or just like a day after, because I feel like after I come back a week, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
Yep.
I really don't remember what I was thinking.
Yeah. So the worst time to if you're doing full-length exams, the worst time to review a full-length exam is right after you've taken the full-length exam, because you're exhausted and you're tired. You're not going to retain anything. You might feel like, oh, it's all fresh in my mind, I better just do it right now. But you're actually wasting time at that point. So just close the books, close the computer, go do something else, non-MCAT related. The best day to do it though, is the next day. So you start the next couple of days, because then your process is still fresh in your mind. I always recommend to students, so I would recommend this to each and every one of you, keep your scratch work from all your practice problems, because then you can go back and actually like kind of forensically go through, oh, I missed a minus sign here, or, you know, I moved this, I used the wrong formula. You can actually figure out where those errors were made, instead of using and then obviously at some point you want to start practicing using the wet erase or the dry erase sheet that they're going to actually have you use on the test. But at least for your practice, it's just keep your scratch work even. And that way you can see kind of what's going on as it were.
Okay. Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome.
Very welcome. You're very welcome. I have time. I have like 2 minutes that I can stay. So we'll wrap this up in just a couple minutes. I think we got to these questions. I think Fatima posted the newsroom link. Rumor that admissions committees look at a CARS score first and weight it most heavily. So that's not true at all. And there was like a big deal because CARS was another novel sort of section, and everybody was predicting that it's critical analysis. You do a lot of that in medical school, but we still don't have good correlations. I haven't seen, I'm sure there are papers out there, but we don't have enough good information about how predictive it is, what its predictive value for medical school success is. So our school doesn't look at that first or weight it heavily. So I think you ought to plan to do well. Sometimes people ask, how do you prepare? How would you answer that, Petros?
In terms of so we hear all the rumors. I have asked, just, at the conferences that I've seen you at, Dr. Calloway, like I've asked other admissions officers, like, hey, what do you guys do with MCAT scores? I've gotten some responses sometimes that they do look at certain scores more than others. It was more true though with the old MCAT like 5 years ago than it is now, because to your point, we had more information as far as the correlation. I mean, we're just now getting to the point where the first batch of test takers of this new exam are finishing med school, right? So we're just starting to get that correlation. But yeah, I would say this, like, don't do what some students' genius strategy is sometimes, and by genius I put that in quotation marks, where they say, oh, I'll just do really well in the other sections and I just won't worry about the cars. Like, no, the stories that I always hear are, you want well-rounded, you don't want overly lopsided either though, right? Like, you don't have to be well-rounded, but you don't want to be overly lopsided where you just only do well in one thing or, one area. So it's that. Here's the cool thing though. The more you practice and the more you perfect your skills for the car section, it actually translates over to the science sections, since the science sections have the same critical thinking skills that you need for the car section plus the science. So it's actually a good place to start. In a weird way. So there's that. There was a private question that came into me from Victoria. Victoria, if you don't mind me answering this publicly. Question was, do we recommend learning and memorizing OCHEM reactions? You do need to know OCHEM reactions. So the chart I showed you showed a little sliver for OCHEM. It's misleading because OCHEM is the underlying science for all of biochem. So yes, you do need to know OCHEM. Do you need to know all the reactions that your OCHEM professor required you to know? No. There's a defined number of reactions, and that's available from the AMC as far as
Great.
as far as the
Great.
So.
Well, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to say one more time the disclaimer that I sent you once in the chat and told you at the beginning. We're recording, and in this new we're trying to figure out how to protect your privacy and all that. So I had told y'all at the beginning and then through the chat in the middle that you could become anonymous. If I can't figure out a way how to just focus on the speakers, my co-host and I, then if you have a problem with your name showing on your tile, please let me know so we can delve deeper. I'm learning video editing too these days. So thank you all. Thank you, Petros. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
It's
always
been a great hour and a half. I hope you all got some good tips to take with you as you prepare for this MCAT. You know that we're going to do another web chat in 2 weeks, probably every 2 weeks for a while now. You can send us your questions. You can post them on the Club PreMed. If you got here without joining Club PreMed, please go join Club PreMed and you can post questions on that page, or you can always email me. You just have to give me a little time to get to your answer. So we're here to help you and happy to do that. Can't wait to hear about all your successes. Petros, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm so
You're very welcome indeed.
Reconnected. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And you all stay safe. Try not to let all these new challenges play with your mind. Stay positive and active and all that. And we'll see you in person sometime soon.
Yes.
Petros, you want to say bye?
Goodbye. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Dr.
Bye.
Cole.
Thank you, Petros.